He is the founder and CEO of renewable energy firm Solar Philippines, Southeast Asia's largest solar company with a mission to make cheap, reliable electricity universally accessible. At 31, he manages a portfolio of other businesses, which now includes media. With us now in Thought Leaders, please welcome Leandro Antonio L. Leviste. Good to have you with us. Leand, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Kathy.
Gosh, it's been what, 10 years since you set up Solar Philippines. Time's just flown by, so congratulations. That's quite a milestone.
Thank you very much. And I should even mention that it was right after I interned at Meralco and even set foot in TV5's office as part of my internship that I started this company. So it's very, very meaningful that we get to work with the MVP group.
You have. And in fact, I was surprised in your LinkedIn. That's where I discovered that you did some time in Meralco as an intern. If I'm not mistaken, that would be in 2013.
Yes.
Is that correct?
And
then you did say that you just spent 3 months there, and you said that you kind of discovered the opportunity for distributed generative power in your internship.
Yes, it was around that time that people were studying solar rooftop installations as a way to save from the high cost of electricity in the Philippines. And I was asking many of the experts in the power industry why there weren't large installations in the Philippines yet. The answer was that it's still expensive, and because the price was falling quickly, people were still assuming old prices. So the Philippines tends to take a few years to really digest what the latest technology is. And that was really my first encounter with the inefficiency of markets, where I saw that if you took the conventional wisdom, you would not have started a solar company yet, but that there was luckily this opportunity which proved to have been the right time to go into in the mid-2010s. Since then, the solar industry in the Philippines has really grown, but we continue to encounter the view that the market is only this big when we believe it should be that big. And that, I believe, has been the recurring theme in the bets that we've made, that we have bet on a larger than expected market based on the cost competitiveness of solar energy.
But that early in that company, I mean, that's fossil fuel led of a legacy company that you've partnered with just about a couple of months ago. I mean, was that already in your sphere of knowledge at that time that you decided that you would go for Solar Philippines?
I think solar,
that you would partner with a fossil fuel-led legacy company.
Yes, I think solar energy has long been attractive to distribution utilities because they're not really in the business of generating from fossil fuel, but providing cheap and reliable electricity to end users. And the interest was not really lacking, but it's always just been the view on the competitiveness. And that's why when the feed-in tariff in the Philippines ended in 2016, and there were many renewable energy groups asking for a new round of subsidy, we were grateful that we got to sign the first post-feed-in tariff solar power supply agreement with Meralco at a price that was almost half of the feed-in tariff rate. And Meralco has continuously been one of the leading adopters of solar energy for wholesale supply that has also proven that it's not about one technology or another technology, it's about whatever's cost competitiveness. And because solar has proven to be cost competitive, then the amount of solar being procured in the Philippines has increased, not even based on environmental protection, but based on savings to consumers.
But it took some time for you to come around Meralco again. You've done a lot of other business groups in that 10-year span. You've started with SM Group, with the solar panel roofing up the malls, rooftops. And then you went to Ayala for ASEN, and then Prime Infra with Ricky Razon, before you ended up with Manny V.
That's
Pangilinan.
an interesting observation as far as our joint ventures are concerned. But as far as power supply, Meralco has always been the biggest game in town. And as I said, first power supply agreement that we signed was in 2016 with Meralco. And we actually signed a second one in 2017. That one at the lowest price of any technology in the Philippines at 2 pesos 99 centavos per kilowatt hour. That power supply agreement had also set a benchmark for what solar could be that I believe encouraged Meralco to procure more solar energy so that the next contract that we signed with them with batteries, which was first discussed around 2020 and culminated in the signing of the contract by 2022 with Meralco, was for a total 3,500 megawatt solar development. So our company's entire history has really been trying to convince Meralco to procure solar energy on the basis of cost competitiveness. And again, we are grateful that because of the initial projects that we did, the cost has been going down and the quantity has been going up. And while along the way we were working with various groups to fund the project supplying Meralco, we also are grateful that now, rather than simply being the off-taker for the power supply, we're also able to co-invest with Meralco in the building of the plants. Because this last project that we have in Nueva Ecija for 3,500 megawatts is going to be supposedly the largest single contract and site solar project in the world. And the total project cost is humongous. So to have the support of Meralco to ensure the timely completion of the project will be very helpful for both the company and for ensuring adequate supply in the Philippine grid.
But what does it mean for costs? I mean, we always talk about how high the power costs here are in the Philippines, and you've had these flagship projects that you mentioned where the costs of solar power had really proven that it could be affordable for people, but people aren't really just feeling it. The electricity costs are still going up as we speak.
Yes, the high cost in the Philippines is largely attributable to the high cost of importing fossil fuel, with fossil fuel still being over 80% of the country's power generation, which is why the average generation cost that we pay in the Philippines has gone up quite a bit, from before around 5 pesos to now around 7 or 8 pesos per kilowatt hour. Meanwhile, I earlier said that the cost of solar just on its own could be, let's say, 3 plus pesos per kilowatt hour. And the reason why that has not yet significantly decreased generation costs is not actually because of anything on the side of the market, but more on the side of the development of the supply. Because it takes years to put up a solar power plant, and there's a lot of power plants that already exist in the Philippines. So any energy transition will take a few decades, in fact, for what were once new technologies to become the mainstream. So at least we got it going over the past decade, and hopefully over the next decade, solar will overtake coal as the largest source of energy in the Philippines for the benefit of lower power prices for consumers.
But as far as government's concerned, they're just looking at 35% of renewables in the energy mix. Are you looking beyond that?
So the 35% renewable energy share for the renewable portfolio standard is the government's target for 2030. And the government has also set a target of 50% for 2040. Now, I guess for many people, they're thinking only of 2030, but 2040 is not that far away. As far as, think of it as 2024, of the same distance now as what 2008 was from now. So I hope that we can work to make sure that 50% renewable energy by 2040 will happen, because for people who, like most Filipinos, are still below the age of 30, that 2040 is what will end up mattering as far as the overall improvement of living conditions in the Philippines for the long term.
But first, we got to get to 2026 and
Yes.
2027, because this is first phase and second phase of that huge Teras solar project that you've been talking about, which can and will be the world's biggest solar farm project. Are you looking to be on target, given the challenges of maybe procuring land, or maybe even procuring the partners, the foreign partners that you'll be needing in that last stretch?
Thank you for that question. The land for the Teras Solar Project's first phase has already been secured.
They're all titled.
Yes. And the company, which is listed in the PSE, has disclosed that it has over 3,000 hectares in its ownership. And the completion of the project will largely be dependent on the construction, especially of the transmission lines. The project is going to need a lot of work, and as you said, foreign partners, because there's actually been perhaps no single power plant of this cost and size in the Philippines before. And we are therefore thankful that we already have the help of Meralco, and hopefully some of these other big companies that perhaps some of them Meralco is also known to be reliable partners in other fields before. The Teras Solar project will produce around 5 terawatt hours of energy per year, if I'm not mistaken, or 5 billion kilowatt hours, which will be around 5% of the total power generation of the Philippines. And the total power generation of the Philippines needs to grow by around 5% more per year. So I'm saying this to give context that even if this is one of the, or the single largest solar projects in the world, it's still only a few percent of the whole pie. And the pie is growing. So if you were to check with the energy resource planners, they would say that there's actually room for 3, 4, or even more Terra solar sized projects in the Philippines. And it's really a matter of us power companies delivering the projects more than government or market actions to create demand for these projects. So we just got to get to work and make sure that these projects are delivered on time.
And to get it going with foreign partners, as you say. So how many are you speaking with?
Well, it's Meralco that's leading that. And I also have been making sure that the land and the transmission for the project will be delivered on time, with some of them visiting the site. But that I am not really at liberty to say beyond what has been publicly disclosed, that there have been several offers that have already been given, with the final offers expected. I think it was disclosed in the next 2 or so months.
So you're the one assigned to take care of the land, and that in itself is a huge challenge. You made a mention of the transmission, but the real element to that is connecting it to the grid, because you want to power up General Metro Manila, a densely populated area, which you hadn't done before in your previous 2 flagship projects. How's that coming along in actually getting it to be connected to the National Grid Corporation's grid system?
Yes, there's actually a lot of vacant land in the Philippines, but what there's not a lot of is vacant land near Manila where there is a reasonably close grid. And our first solar project was in Calatagan, Batangas, and our second solar farm was in Concepcion, Tarlac, this third one being in Nueva Ecija. And these are basically the 3 corners surrounding Manila, where there's, in each of them, a big transmission line that you can connect to. Thankfully, the one in Nueva Ecija is only around 12 kilometers away from our 3,000 hectares consolidation. And the other ones, while they were closer to the transmission lines, didn't have as big of a nearby transmission line, which is why the Nueva Ecija one is the biggest, because it has the largest transmission line where most of the power coming from north of Manila passes. That just happens to be 12 kilometers from the site.
The other 2 projects, proofs of concept that you got the banks to finance, how did that go for the communities that it powered up? I mean, just to give a view of how our residents in Metro Manila will feel like once that grid is up and connected, your solar panels connected to the grid, powering communities here in Metro Manila.
Yes, the first projects that we have had in these other provinces, Batangas and Tarlac, which have been operating for many years now, are mostly sized in accordance with the power demand for solar at the time. Feed-in tariff in one case, Meralco offtake in another. And we hope that the next phases of the projects will be much larger, because again, there's no other room basically to build a big solar project supplying the greater Manila area than these different corners that we've mentioned. As far as the effect on the local communities, I would say that power generation is quite detached from consumers, at least visibly, because you're just supplying the electricity that goes into the grid, which supplies the distribution utilities, which are the ones that the utilities and the consumers really see. That's why the ordinary Filipino doesn't really know the names of the power generation companies. It knows the name of Meralco. But that its effect for consumers should be if we can lower the cost of the generation, which is still the majority of the electricity bill. I would hope that with the 35% by 2030, like you said, or 50% by 2050, the generation costs in the Philippines can trend from the current 8 and former 5 down to below 5, so that in effect, the cost of electricity in the Philippines should be around 30% lower than what it is today.
So you mean the communities in the two provinces that you mentioned, in Concepcion, Tarlac, as well as in
Calatagan, Batangas.
in Calatagan, Batangas, they haven't really experienced power prices to be any lower ever since you powered it up with solar.
Because the total solar generation in the Philippines is still probably around 3% of the total power consumption, that the power goes into the grid, and it's not like it becomes the prevailing rate for the immediately surrounding community. So we will need to build a lot more solar so that that closer to 3 pesos tariff becomes the norm in the Philippines. But the local communities, of course, benefit from increased taxes and employment. So one of the reasons why we're able to get a lot of land in these areas is because there isn't a lot of industry that create jobs, that instead of working very hard for low pay in the agricultural sector, we are happy that now there is at least a semi-industrial opportunity in these areas through solar farm construction and operation.
So what can we expect then if and when you power with solar, using Terra Solar, Metro Manila? Will we experience any maybe adjustments in our monthly power payments?
Yes, it should definitely decrease the prices
It
because
would, by how much?
you won't need to be buying from the most expensive peaking plants, particularly diesel plants, which should be phased out in the Philippines, and reducing the consumption of other power sources as well. And sometimes those prices can be very high when there's a shortage. Sometimes when there's these spikes in the electricity bill, it's not because of an increase in the rest of the power charges, but the increase in the prices in the 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. of the day when everyone's air conditioners are on and we have to turn on the most expensive plants. And that's why solar is actually quite appropriate for the Philippines, because in other places, the highest demand for electricity occurs when people turn on their heaters. But in the Philippines, it's when they turn on their air conditioners, which is when the sun is available the most.
Right. So what sort of a percentage decrease can we expect on our power bills then, soon as Terra Solar starts to solar us up in Metro Manila?
Let's say it like this. If all the power generation in an area were sourced from solar and its associated technologies, the batteries and so on, then you should say 30% of the generation costs should decrease. But because it's still just a small percent, then it's, let's say, 10% or 30%. So it's not going to be that immediate because there's still so much non-solar generation out there. But we're hopeful that it's just around the corner that we have more solar, if we think in terms of a person's lifetime, that hopefully eventually the Philippines will have 30% lower power prices with more solar energy.
So scale and impact, say by 2030, that's when we'll really feel the impact of solar power.
I would say so, in terms of lower prices. But in terms of supply availability, the country is forecasting a huge shortage, and in fact already has a shortage because of the increasing demand, and there wasn't that many new power plants put up in the last few years. So while it's not a benefit, it's an avoidance of a harm, that we're not going to have rolling blackouts once these new power plants come online.
A shortage on solar panels,
on all kinds of power generation.
On all kinds of power generation, so that also includes battery equipment, the battery energy storage systems.
The equipment is not really in short supply, but it's power generation in the Philippine grid. So I think NGCP had red alert at some time in the last few weeks, and they have to shut down the service in certain areas to fit the available supply. So at the very least, with more power plants coming online, I hope that we will not need to have that kind of thing happening again, because I think in other countries, people don't really experience that. So it would not be good for bringing foreign investors into the Philippines if they have to forecast that for a few hours every year, they have to turn the power off. So we would want to make sure that there's always going to be an ample reserve of power in the Philippines.
Exactly. I know what you mean when you say that the alerts coming off from yellow to red. You know, these alerts often happen every year when it's summertime, and with the extreme heat outside, we're experiencing red, yellow alerts in Luzon and Visayas. But in terms of the equipment, there's also a supply chain issue that we're facing when it comes to the battery energy storage systems that come with powering solar panels. So might that in any way derail the timeline that you have for the 2 phases for Teras Solar?
It's safe to say that the ability of these large manufacturers abroad to ramp up production should not be underestimated. It's always been talked about that solar panels and now batteries could be in short supply, but then suddenly some new company puts up a new factory and suddenly the shortage of manufacturing capacity is solved. And it's actually that increase in solar and battery production capacity that's driving down the cost. So the market is efficient in that respect, where when there's a shortage of supply, the price could go up, but then someone else puts up a new factory and brings the price down. And that's what's brought solar panels down 80% in cost over the past decade, and batteries down 90% in cost over the past decade.
And you're assured that there's going to be enough supply of batteries?
Yes.
Right now, there's a geopolitical situation going on that is causing a potential supply shortage of batteries, the battery storage system.
I think that's wishful thinking on the part of the battery suppliers, because there has always been new suppliers coming in whenever there is a looming shortage that then brings the price down, which is why it's actually not a good business to be in the solar panel or battery manufacturing, because there's just so much competition for the benefit of consumers.
And also new technology coming in, because solar panels in fields, I mean, maybe not needing any more land, because the solar panels themselves can be installed in homes, buildings. You know, it becomes more of an independent setup rather than needing land. So how are you preparing for this eventual shift that a lot more of the buildings and homes and maybe even subdivisions are powering themselves up by their own solar panels on their rooftops?
Solar panel efficiency keeps on going up. When we were starting, the solar panels were 250 to 300 watts, and now they're 600 to 800 watts. And the consequence is that instead of needing 1.5 hectares per megawatt, you might only need maybe half of that per megawatt. But that I still think that by 2050, the vast majority of solar capacity will be in these fields because of the economies of scale of connecting to the grid as a way to bring that power to people's homes.
So it's still grid connected. This is going to be the technology going forward.
Yes, as you commented, our first projects were on the rooftops of shopping malls, and we found that there's limited space, high operations and maintenance cost, and even if you were to put all of their rooftops with solar, it's still just a small percentage of the building's demand that is supplied by that. So the way to not just be a small percent, but to be the biggest source of energy in the Philippines, which is what we want people to start thinking of solar to be, not just a piece, but a big piece, then it has to be largely supplied from big open fields.
From big open fields and maybe powering AI? I mean, that's a huge question, isn't it? I mean, The Economist in a recent article said generative AI is so ravenous for energy that it puts to question the amount of clean energy we can actually provide an economy that's growing and also wanting to be climate friendly, and at the same time providing for generative AI? Are we even preparing for that?
Well, hopefully the AI will make it cheaper to produce solar panels as well.
Can it?
It supposedly will be able to advance all sorts of scientific progress. But I think all these new industries are one of the exciting things about being in the power sector. Because if you're in, for example, commercial real estate, it's so scary what the future demand for offices might be. We might not even have offices anymore. But if you're in solar power generation, you can bet that even if consumer preferences change and the world moves to AI, that electric power, it seems like, will still be in big demand.
The consumer preference in terms of aesthetics, I mean, there has been discussion overseas that, not everybody wants a rooftop with a solar panel and look like just everyone else from the top. Is that an issue here in the Philippines when you talk to the subdivision owners, the homeowners? I don't want a roof with a solar panel. And that becomes a restriction for you doing business with them.
Yes, I think some people want to show that they have a roof with solar panels.
Also, it's so cool. I mean, it's cooler than having none.
Yes, although they now have a much talked about Tesla solar roof tiles. But that, to put it in context, there's probably only 100 megawatts plus minus of residential solar rooftop installations in the Philippines. There's only a few thousand homes that have been reported to have net metering installed within the Meralco franchise, and maybe twice as much in the whole country. So it's not proven to be of scale, and that's because of the many logistical challenges of installing on each rooftop. And while it is good for anyone to contribute to the increased renewable energy transition, I still believe that the vast majority of the capacity needs to come from these utility scale applications if we are to bring solar to a larger scale.
Now that you mentioned Elon Musk's Tesla Motors, in fact, as he has first off inspired you with Solar City. That's why you have Solar Philippines. But now he's moved to Tesla Motors, and which we know is powered by his own solar batteries, or at least solar technology. What is your plan going forward when it comes to putting solar panels and maybe transport systems as we're moving to electric vehicles, on top of vehicles, on top of maybe terminals, that kind of sort?
One of the things that I came to learn in business is to focus on a very simple model that works and just do it very well. And everything on the demand side, we don't think about very much, because that's what the distribution utilities are incentivized to do, creating more market for their existing grids. And we are on the upstream, creating power supply for them. And we're just focused on making sure that there's going to be more power plants to supply the utilities when hopefully the Philippines, for example, will have more AI data centers and electric vehicle demand.
Well, let's stay upstream then and talk about Ras and Co, because there's a lot of land there when you study the company, but you did buy it using your privately held holding company through countrywide investments. What's the plan there? I mean, in terms of timing, it just came a few months after your divestment in SB New Energy and investment in the media company ABS-CBN. How does Ras and Company fit into the whole mix if you talk about the upstream business in solar?
We are always focused on looking for undervalued assets, and found that it was interesting that a company that owned so many hectares of land in a nice place in Batangas only had such a low market cap. And you don't find opportunities like that every day. So when we find it, then we like to move in as fast as we can, and that we're always on the lookout for more. So
it is land. You bought Ras and Co shares. You're now the largest share. It's for the land. You intend to turn it for solar power business.
Yes. So first, any undervalued thing is of course interesting, and more so if it's something that we think has a quite durable value like land. So regardless of economic conditions, it's quite a good thing for a company then to have a large number of its assets in land. The use for the land also can change, because if you have land, you can put a solar farm, you can put an industrial park, you can put a housing development.
So what are you going to put?
I think that it's important to get land and fix whatever issues there are on land first before making a final decision, which is, again, great value of land, its optionality. But that you probably need to have more industrial parks in the Philippines so that there's more demand for power. And then you have a synergy between the demand through industrial parks and solar farms supplying them.
So this is not in any way related to your Teras solar expansion, this particular tract of land under Ras and Co.
It would always be good to have solar farms on any vacant land, because also the development of real estate demand takes a long time. And solar panels can be installed, and then once the demand comes, uninstalled. But I would say that the best use for land should eventually not be solar panels, as many people have remarked, but for spaces for people, and that the solar panels maybe in the future can be on top, but that there's a interim period where we can put the solar panels on the land. But I would also say that there's many other opportunities to buy these attractive lands at these prices, and companies with attractive lands at good prices, including with a former subsidiary of that company that has since been taken control of by the First Pacific Group, and that's Rojas Holdings Inc. So what we can say is that we are in talks with Rojas Holdings Inc. to invest for a larger stake in that company, so that we can turn what was once one of the leading sugar producers in the country into a property company whose land bank can be, I believe, well used for industrial park development in Batangas.
And that would mean creating jobs for those who lost them when Central Azucarera had closed down in that particular tract of land. So that would be under countryside development.
Yes, that's right. Not only to bring jobs back, but better jobs. Because I've been visiting the town of Nasugbu for most of my life, given that
it's your dad's hometown.
Our family has roots in Western Batangas. And the town has always struck me as being unexpectedly underdeveloped, because it's so close to Manila. A lot of people have beach homes there, and yet there was no industry. And consequent to that, there was not a high consumer base in the area. There's no SM shopping mall in the towns of Nasugbu, Lian, Calatagan, and
Why
Tui.
is that? Did you ever ask Dad why?
Because people have no jobs, that they have income to go and shop in the malls. So I hope that we'll be able to create industrial parks, for example, as the base for a local economy, so that not just like in a tourism development, that I believe people think create lots of jobs, but don't actually create that many jobs. That if we have commercial and tourism, but also industrial development, then there's more benefit that trickles down to the people, so that for the sake of business, there's also going to be higher disposable income for consumers, so that you can have a whole city grow there as well. So I do think that the nice thing about investing in real estate in rural areas is that the interest of the company and the community is very well aligned. It's not like when you're trying to supply an existing market, where actually the interest of the supplier is to charge a good price for their product. If you're trying to develop a new market, the interest of the supplier is to give good service at a good price, so that there can become a market for the benefit of the community, which will also benefit the company.
All right, so how does media fit in all this? Your recent purchase of 8.5 shares of ABS-CBN kind of surprised the market. You were doing solar projects here and there, buying land, and then here you are becoming the largest shareholder outside the Lopez family.
Well, for one, a large part of ABS's asset is also in real estate. So that's
So,
a good
yes.
benefit in any company, that your primary business might encounter difficulties, but you have some tangible asset underlying the company. But moreover, you could also say I grew up visiting Batangas and having interest in land there on one side of my family. And I grew up also visiting my mom at the ABS-CBN newsroom on the other side of my family. So there's of course, not only sentimentality, but also exposure to that company. And we have long seen the unique value and, you could say, irreplicability of that company, which has, despite many challenges, proven to be of great endurance in its position in content creation in the Philippines.
So what did your mom Lauren say when you purchased those shares?
I told her that it was, of course, in time for Mother's Day, and
Was it really?
Yes.
Did you say that?
yes, and
How did she react?
I think that she, like others, would remark that it's seemingly a risky investment because of the challenges of any media company nowadays, but that even a challenging market at the right price is worth looking at.
How did she react?
That it's very risky, and that maybe buying land is a safer bet.
Now the question is among analysts and shareholders is, will you be taking a board seat at ABS-CBN?
We want to respect the company to make any such disclosure itself, but that we have said that we are very much interested in helping the company and hope that it will be to the benefit of the shareholders, the employees, and the media sector in the Philippines, that more investment and more help can go to media companies, not only ABS-CBN, but many others, because the media business is not actually that big of a business in financial terms compared to, for example, power and real estate, but it's very important, and that the country needs to make sure that these media companies stay in business, and that the media professionals keep their jobs, because the whole economy depends on having a healthy media sector.
So how actively will you be involved in the strategic direction for ABS-CBN?
Well, I think I can safely say that it's not my business or expertise. So we really want to just be a helpful partner to the people whose expertise is in running media companies.
So it's more of a diversification for you. At the start, you said it was all about maybe impartially land as a reason for buying an undervalued investment.
I think the land is a downside protection, but that I think anything at the right price is worth looking at. I wouldn't say that one should deliberately be trying to diversify if there is something that we know a little bit about, because I've actually been visiting that station for many of my young years and exposed to people in it, of course. Then anything that you know a little bit about, that you see being offered at what you think is an unnaturally low price, is worth being opportunistic in buying of. And it was because there was a large block of shares that was being sold down in the market that we came into it. And I would say if there weren't 10% or so of a company being sold at its all-time low, that we wouldn't have been able to, and ended up acquiring that number of shares. But I guess in that respect, that's one of the benefits of being an entrepreneur compared to a bigger family conglomerate in the Philippines, that you can move to be opportunistic when you see, for example, 10% of a company being offered at its all-time low.
Did you have prior conversations with Mr. Pangilinan, given that he has media assets in the conglomerate?
I bought the shares in my own capacity because I saw that there was a big block available in the market.
Now, you have been traveling in May. I've seen that you've been to the Bay Area, all the way to New York, and in between a bit of Omaha. Now, who goes to Omaha if he's not meeting the Oracle of Omaha?
Yes.
Were you there for the shareholders meeting of Berkshire Hathaway?
Warren Buffett is my idol, and that's when I can tell you that I really do believe that there's a lot of inefficiencies in the market, a lot of undervalued companies, where, for example, you can buy a small piece of it at a much lower price and the whole thing would be for sale. So I would want to live by the principle that any investment that we make should live by the Oracle's teachings, but that the other teaching that he makes is to stick within your circle of competence. And as a young person, you should try and develop circles of competence. I would hope that we can find lots of gems in provincial real estate and in solar energy, of course, but that it's also interesting, as per Mr. Buffett's teachings, to try and learn about varied industries in hopes that you can find more of these gems in new circles of competence, like in media.
That's coming from a 93-year-old, the time you visited him.
Yes, and he's been doing this for close to 70 years now.
Oh my gosh.
So he says that he keeps on learning something new every day, and that's really his business. It's not really having any brilliance, but just being always trying to learn new things.
The age is just a number. Elon Musk had something to say to him. Elon said, Buffett, you should buy Tesla shares because it is, quote unquote, the obvious move. I mean, you cashed out of Tesla shares to set up Solar Philippines. It partially funded your startup. Do you agree with Elon Musk that Buffett should buy Tesla shares?
I think that Tesla's quite a speculative investment at the moment, but that perhaps Elon was saying that because Warren Buffett actually bought a large position in BYD, which is the Chinese Tesla, back when it was still a so-called startup company. And it proved to be a very successful bet outside of his perceived circle of competence. So that really is one of the data points that shows that he is the greatest of all time. That he was already in his 70s then, and he bought a venture capital tech investment in China that ended up being a home run. And we mere mortals can only hope to try and approach that by trying to learn as much as we can in new fields to the extent that we can.
So as a mere millennial mortal investor, what would your top investment ideas be? Maybe give us two.
It's a very good question. Well, it's really finding undervalued land in the province where you're from. I think any Filipino watching this has some roots in some province where they know more of than the ordinary investor. So good to focus in your hometown.
Would you ever go back to school? You've done 3 years at Yale, and now that you've done some stuff with your business, your startup, do you ever think of going back?
It's a very interesting question. And I think that when you're 20 years old, like I was when I started this company, you think that 2 years is a very long time, which was the amount of time that I needed to finish school. And it happened that it was necessary to focus on the business at the early days so that we could build a first mover advantage. But that it's now been over 10 years that I've been doing this business. And in that respect, I probably could have taken 2 years out of it. But that the opportunity cost of taking 2 years after you've started a business is so high that it becomes less attractive to go and do it. So I would recommend that people do finish their school when they can, unless you find a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that needs a first mover advantage to be built on now. But to directly answer your question, who knows if the cost is outweighed by the benefit in the future. But at the moment, I think the cost of not focusing on the business is too great.
And just as a final question, the cost and the benefits, now that you get to that. 10 years ago, you were quoted in a PhilStar column saying you would only consider entering politics if the system changes dramatically from how it is today. Has it changed?
I think that anywhere it can be said that people in the private sector are able to make a bigger impact. Because if you're in politics, you're actually in a very rigid system that also depends on many other people. And I don't think that any one person can make so big an impact. Even the most powerful people in politics in the country need the support of their colleagues. Whereas in business, if you are like Mr. Buffett and you're just reading and finding new investment ideas and suddenly you become the CEO of one of the biggest companies in the world, Berkshire Hathaway is bigger than the Philippine economy, then you could potentially get a lot more done. So I think for as long as we have a lot of value that I see we can make in business, then that seems to be the best way to help by hopefully building companies that can make not only good returns, but a very good social impact as well.
Well, we look forward to you unlocking the value in Teras Solar. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Leon. Appreciate the time
Thank
and
you.
the expertise. And catch us next again on Thursday at 9 p.m. Philippine Standard Time on One News. You can also check out the long conversation on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. I'm Kathy Yang. This is Thought Leaders.